Hello and welcome into the great cricket debate here on Global Cricket Radio. And unfortunately, my co-host John Morrison, or fortunately for him, he's away deer hunting at the moment. But what a replacement I have, and what a timely replacement I have with Neil Manthorpe joining me from Cape Town as we sort of look, I suppose, backwards and forwards around particular issues, and the main one is, I mean, Neil and I were chatting, and we thought, well, let's do a show. Let's just talk some cricket. Let's have a good debate. And then Neil literally, just as we agreed to do the show, South Africa Cricket released their squad to come to New Zealand, if you can even call that a squad, for when they arrive in February.
Ah, sorry, Andy. I didn't realise that. Yeah, that was. Uh, oh. Andy, let's start again.
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine. We'll just
Sorry, I didn't know that was an in, mate. You just stopped. I thought you were going to ask me a question.
That's all right. That's all right. We're still getting to find our way. But I mean, Neil, I suppose the subject of the show basically is um, about I suppose where Test cricket sits generally. Um, Um, but I suppose the timing of it has been good for us because um, the South African selectors have released their squad to go to New Zealand in February. I mean, I read some of your articles leading up to it, and you picked, well, from what I could see, three of the four players that might have got selected. But let me just ask it more simply. I mean, what did you make of the squad that the selectors have put out there?
Andy, it's a sad day for Test cricket. It's a sad day for South African Test cricket in particular. But I think that we shouldn't get distracted by the men who have been selected. I mean, they are all decent cricketers. We're not talking about anybody who's been plucked out of club cricket. Although Dane Pete was playing minor league cricket for Washington Freedom. He left South Africa before he turned 30 to go and pursue a new life in America. So he was persuaded back by the Test coach, Shukri Conrad, and he's come back and he's played a couple of games in the domestic competition, and he's played for South Africa A. So they are good cricketers. It's just not the Test squad. It's a matter of conjecture whether any of this 14-man squad, I think it'll soon be 15, would have made it into the Test squad anyway. But David Beddingham made his debut in the first Test against India. Looked
Yes.
very good, made 50. He averages 50 in first-class cricket, but otherwise, and he was basically shoehorned into the Test team in order to be available and to have got some Test cricket under his belt before going to New Zealand, because he too was persuaded not to qualify for England. He, as you know, plays for Durham in the county championship, and he had set his sights on qualifying. He's got an ancestral passport. He was going to try and qualify for England. Shukri Conrad called him up. They're old mates from Western Province in Cape Town, and said, we've got a bit of a crisis looming for New Zealand. If you want to play Test cricket, you've got a choice. You can either take your chances with England, qualify after 3 more years of residency, or if you come back now, I'll take you straight away to New Zealand. In fact, you can play against India. So that's a massive, massive shoehorning operation there. But he's a good player. He's a Test player. I'm not sure that many else are.
Well, I obviously I followed a bit of that first Test match in Centurion and Beddingham. Well, the couple of things I remember was, well, first of all, he made a half century on debut in that South Africa total of 408, I think it was. And the other thing I remember about it was that the catch he took off Ravichandran Ashwin, who just absolutely threw his wicket away when his team needed him to sort of bed in and sit there for a while. But Yeah, you in your article that you wrote on the 10th of September earlier this year, you mentioned at that time that um, that Shukri Conrad was well, your words were busy scraping together a possible squad, and you mentioned David Bettingham at Durham, and you mentioned Dane Peterson at Nottinghamshire. Approached, and that they were approached about their availability at that time. But man, it was actually the next paragraph that really caught my attention in your article. And I just want to quote it if you don't mind. Um, so just before I do, I mean the whole point of this is that for the listeners that perhaps don't know the background is that what Neil's basically saying is that South Africa had two things they had to do. First of all, they had to play New Zealand in a test series, and second of all, they had to run a domestic competition, and there was a clash basically. And because of the clash, it seems like Test cricket has been deprioritised, and we can get into the nuts and bolts of that. But what Neil said in his article was the regular Test players, however, are seething. It's precisely because they are so angry that they have all been so quiet on the subject. All of the players I have spoken to insisted I do not quote them, even unattributed. Although the landscape for national honours may change in the years to come, at the moment the Proteas Test cap remains the indisputable greatest form of recognition. The prospect of a dozen of them being handed out like party hats infuriates those who have earned them. I mean, Manners, that's a pretty strong statement, but no, obviously you had a reason to say it.
Yeah, and that's before we even get into the finances. There are some players. There are a couple of players who were on the lowest bracket in the SA20, the lowest auction bracket, which is 175,000 rand, and they would stand to earn about 250,000 if they went to New Zealand. So, even if you do take it back to the very basics, to the bottom line, literally. Um, this makes no financial sense whatsoever. But it is about more than that. Take Kagiso Rabada, for example. He's one of the greatest fast bowlers of all time. He's got he's the only one with over 200 wickets and a strike rate of under 40. He's a brilliant bowler. He wants to play Test cricket. He has been outspoken about his love of Test cricket and how it needs to be supported and how it cannot be allowed to wither on the vine. He's furious, and he's not alone. Temba Bavuma's captain of the Test team. But here's the thing that, well, there are lots of things that I must try and keep my emotions in check. But one of the things that gets me really, really badly is that the SA20, Andy, have 6 teams, as you know, all owned by IPL franchise. They're all IPL teams, basically. So it's a mini IPL in South Africa. And they have squads of 18, 19 if you include the youngster up and coming, who they all had to, uncapped 20-year-olds. So squads of 19. You can only play 11, and they've got 3 or 4 overseas players. So Tony de Zorzi, for example, he's just come into the national team. You may or may not have seen, some of our listeners may have seen him score 100 in his in the ODI series against India, which was impressive. And he's also he played a couple of Test matches now. He's made some runs. He looks the part. And this isn't a metaphor. 10 minutes before the squad was announced, the Durban, whatever they are, the Durban Super Giants issued a press release to say that they'd signed Tony de Zorzi to their squad.
Wow.
He's not going to play a game. He's not going to play 10 minutes before the squad was announced.
So just
they
on
signed
that,
him.
Manners, just on that.
Sorry, Andy, let me just finish that point. They signed him as a replacement for Kyle Abbott, the former Proteas fast bowler. So it's just filling up the numbers. It's just having a squad of 19. Sign Tony de Zorzi. Take him out of the Test picture. He's not going to get a game for the Durban Super Giants, I promise you. And there's 7 or 8 players in a similar position, including the captain Temba Bavuma, who's not going to play even if he's fit for the Sunrisers Eastern Cape, and he's the Test captain. I think it's just really, really selfish and poor management.
Well, I wasn't aware of that situation with de Zorzi, but one of the things I did pick up on, again, it goes back to your article on the 10th of September, which was my birthday, by the way, so thanks for writing it on that day. You mentioned that the players, the effect on the players in terms of like their pay packet is quite significant. So, as you said, the lowest bracket is 175 Rand in the auction. So I guess someone like Tony de Zorzi, for example, is going to bank that. I don't know if it matters whether he plays or not, like in the IPL. But I mean, that's sort of beside the point, right? I mean, the other thing that you said in your article is the players are going to take legal action, and so. Or no, you didn't say that. You said they could take legal action against.
They were considering it. The players'
Yeah,
union was considering doing that.
yeah, but how does that work though, Neil? Because you know the players' union obviously wants the best for their players, but they don't have contracts with these local franchises. They're sort of one-off things that happen if you're lucky enough to get selected. But they do have contracts with South Africa, and South Africa has obligations to play Test matches. So how does that whole situation work?
It would have been an injunction to stop the tour from going ahead, and to have it rescheduled. So it's they got legal opinions, and I mean, the head of the Players Association is himself a highly qualified lawyer, and he informed the players that there were legal grounds to take an injunction to stop the tour from going ahead without the availability of over 50 of the country's best players. But in the end, pragmatism took over, and they realized that they asked themselves what good could come of it. They felt that it was morally the right thing to do. Financially, it was probably the right thing to do, but was it in the general best interests of the game as a whole in South Africa and the global game? And they decided that it wasn't worth it. But this isn't, unfortunately, a one-off, because in 12 months' time, Pakistan are scheduled to come to South Africa for the end-of-year tour, the Boxing Day and New Year's tour, Test matches. And, and then the following year, the West Indies are due to be here, and with their tour and the Pakistan tour overlapping with the SA20. And there's been no word from Cricket South Africa. There's been no reassurance that this is a one-off. It won't ever happen again. In fact, there's reason that people worry for the future of Test cricket, and doesn't come from the players. Yeah, there are 2 or 3, half a dozen, maybe 25 top players around the world who don't feel strongly attached to Test cricket, but I think it's mostly because it's too hard, or they're not very good at it. They find life easier playing T20 cricket, short format cricket. But mostly it's administrators who are in South Africa anyway, who've got no feel whatsoever, no concept, no idea. There's not a single administrator in South Africa who's a former player, not one.
Right. That's interesting.
Whereas if you used to have players who had played the game, had a feel for it and empathy, and understood that it's a game on one level anyway for the greater good. It's not just about money. It's not, because if it was just about money, we wouldn't have club cricket and age group cricket and community cricket. I think there is a bigger picture that's been missing in South Africa.
Well, Neil, you also mentioned in that article about the fact that the fact that 90% of the revenue that Cricket South Africa gets comes from the men's cricket team, the Proteas, and it sort of seems ironic that they're degrading the Proteas in favour of, let's call it a domestic competition run by some outside investors that happen to come from India. That's, I suppose, the one question. And the second one is, and I think it's a good point that you make in your article, does South Africa run the risk of being banned from Test cricket? Or any cricket for that matter, but Test cricket in this case?
Not banned, but outcast. I mean, it amounts to the same thing. They can't. There's no. There are grounds for sanction on by the ICC, because I also write about the ICC's very own charter, which says that international cricket must be prioritised for the greater good of the game. That's in black and white. That's in the ICC constitution that all member nations sign. That's the agreement that they adhere to, or that they agree to adhere to, that they will pick their best team wherever possible for international cricket, which will be prioritized. So you can't, you could hire yourselves the fanciest team of lawyers that you can find that money can buy. You won't get anyone who will be able to put a coherent argument together to say that South Africa are prioritizing Test cricket with the selection of this squad. But it's Andy. I've got about 3 or 4 different points going on at the same time.
No, it's fine. It's fine, Neil. I mean,
do you know what was the first premise of your question?
Well, my question was that Cricket South Africa apparently, well, not apparently, according to what you wrote in your article, is that they make their money from the Proteas. So that was my first question. So if they make 90% of their money from the Proteas, or the men's team, why are they suddenly saying, well, they're not important anymore? Why would you do that?
First, I want to say that that wasn't a thumbsuck figure, because you can go to Cricket South Africa's last 10 annual financial reports, and you'll see that the revenue has been above 90% for all of the last 10 years, and it certainly was before that. The last financial report, I think it was 93.7% of CSA's revenues generated by the men's Proteas team. And why would they now deprioritize it? Because they got themselves into a contractual mess. That's why. This is just really, really poor administration.
Well, it's got to be, right. I mean, I look at New Zealand cricket, and I know that we're a bit of a backwater that no one really pays too much attention to. But I was having a chat on a different show earlier today with a guy in New Zealand, and I said, well, at least New Zealand's got its own house in order. I'm not saying I agree with everything that they do, and there's plenty of things I don't agree with. That's a different matter. But at least they know when the Test team's playing, when the domestic team competition's on, who can play and what. At least it's known. In South Africa, it seems like it's the exact opposite.
I must tell you, Andy, it's fascinating when we hear views from outside, dispassionate, disassociated observations from people. And I just want to tell you, as a dispassionate observer of New Zealand cricket, it is an absolute paragon of perfection when it comes to administration. It is an institution to be held up as a role model in the highest esteem. I know David White didn't do everything perfectly in his 10 years, but my goodness gracious me, he compares with the very, very best. And New Zealand cricket, by the very nature of the size of it and its a limited revenue pool, has done superbly. And they have recognized their limitations. They know that their own side, they don't try to punch above their weight, which is why they do punch so effectively on the field and off the field. I think they've been brilliant. But look, Cricket South Africa, here's the truth of it. they didn't sit down, and Polezi Moseki is the chief executive officer. He was the interim chief executive of Cricket South Africa for almost 18 months. They couldn't find a chief executive of sufficient standing who would even apply for the job.
That was
Such
after
is
Graham
the
Smith
length.
finished, right?
He was director of cricket rather than chief executive.
Oh, okay.
And he went away to become commissioner of the SA20. But they couldn't find, such is the length and history of maladministration at Cricket South Africa, they couldn't find a chief executive who would touch it, who would even apply.
Wow.
Let alone a chief executive with experience within the game. So
why didn't they approach someone like Brian McMillan then? You know, or just some, you know, some highly intelligent person that played the game.
Andy, Brian McMillan works in business. They approached over 25 potential chief executives, none of whom would apply for the job.
Wow.
That's the Brian McMillan. I don't actually know, but he works in. He's a very successful businessman, and he was being a selector, and he stayed within the peripheral touching distance of the game. He might have been a very good choice. But anyway, Polezi Moseki was the chief financial officer at Cricket South Africa. Very good with the numbers. He's an accountant, no feel for the game whatsoever, no empathy for the history of cricket. And he was asked to take hold of the wheel and steer the ship while they found somebody else. They couldn't find anybody. 18 months later, they said, you know what, you're captain now. And he dropped the ball. SA20 gave him the dates of the second edition of the SA20 of the tournament. I wrote it in the Manners on Cricket article, but it was like 8th of March. And 3 months later, Cricket New Zealand sent him the draft schedule for his approval for the 2 test matches, and he signed off on it. He signed off on it. He didn't. He suddenly realized. He then went to New Zealand Cricket and said, "Look, I've made a terrible mistake. Can you please reschedule?" New Zealand Cricket said, "Whoa, no, everything's in place. We've got Australia arriving straight after you. We can't rearrange our whole summer because you made a cock up." So that unfortunately, he then tried to reverse out of it. And then because the SA20 teams are all IPL teams, you can imagine how watertight and lead encased their contracts are with Cricket South Africa. They all said, no, it's perfectly clear here that every single one of our contracted players will be available for the entirety of the tournament, including the nationally contracted players. So Cricket South Africa found themselves in a deep, deep hole, which is where we are right now.
So basically it comes down to an admin error.
It does come down to an admin error.
Unbelievable what you're saying. I mean, I believe it because I'm sure what you're saying is right, but it's unbelievable that you can get into a situation. I don't care whether the guy's a numbers man or not. I mean, in the end of the day, you still got to be smart and intelligent to get to that point. But to make such a blunder, an admin blunder, with such massive consequences, I'm surprised he's still even got his job. Well, mind you, I now know why, because no one else wants it.
Exactly. He shouldn't have his job. It's a massive, massive blunder. But my point about, listen, I've spent 30 years fighting against this insistence by cricket that they should have cricket people involved. And, you know, I've said over and over and over again, you have too many cricket people involved, then common sense goes out of the window. You need accountants, you need independent directors, you need a third eye, you need second, third and fourth opinions, you need some business acumen and nous. But you need a balance. That's the point. And if Polezi Moseki had any idea about the game and what it involves and what it entails, then he wouldn't have made that error. Or if he'd consulted Or if he'd
Yes.
consulted, if he'd actually gone to cricket people and said, listen, New Zealand cricket have said, can we play the first test match from the 4th of February? So, I mean, he understandably has not expounded on his thinking or his thought process, but it's not hard to imagine that Moseki has said, well, the SA20 ends on February the 10th. They want to play the first test on February the 4th. It's only a little overlap. He
Yes.
wouldn't have thought about the warm-up game or the 10 days acclimatization to New Zealand time zones. He would, I mean, it's actually not inconceivable that he would have looked at the schedules and thought, oh, well, it's only a small overlap.
Yeah, and he might have
As
also,
unbelievable as that
yeah, well, he
sounds.
might have also thought, well, not every player is going to be in the final of the SA20, so maybe a few guys will arrive late or whatever. And I suppose that's probably a good juncture to say, well, why is it actually that South Africa's named their team so early? I mean, the tour's still 2023. I mean, albeit the last day. And as you say, the test match doesn't start until the first week of February. Why have they named the team so early? Like, surely there was the ability to, if one team gets knocked out, doesn't get through to the final, then those players suddenly become available.
Yeah, don't think it works like that. In fact, I know it doesn't work like that. And look, let's go back to the Tony de Zorzi example. Maybe the reason they've announced it so early is to actually ensure that they can have a squad. Like Tony de Zorzi was in line to captain the team to New Zealand. And 10 minutes before the squad's announced, he gets signed by the Durban Supergiants. So maybe Cricket South Africa thought, well, we better announce a squad just to try and stop other players being signed
Right.
by the IPL teams.
But it's also very late on in the piece. I mean, which day does the SA20 start? Can't be that far away.
It starts 3 days after the second test against India. So it starts on the 10th of January,
Right,
and the finals on the 10th of February.
right.
And what I find really, I just I find it staggering that the six IPL teams, and I must remind everyone that the SA20, the domestic competition in South Africa, is owned by the IPL effectively. The six teams are IPL teams. So when I refer to the IPL teams, that's what I'm referring to, the six IPL teams. Um, I just find it staggering that they have absolutely categorically insisted on the letter of every line of the contract they have with CSA that every single player will be available for every single game. And there's some nationally contracted players who are struggling to get in to their SA20 team because, as I said, there's three or four overseas players for a start, and the Durban Supergiants, because of the nature of the pitch in Kingsmead in Durban, they've got like three or four spinners, and you've got nationally contracted players who are struggling to get into their SA20 team who could be in New Zealand.
So,
Test players.
but Neil, I'm just thinking about the case of Tony de Zorzi. You say that he was signed, but he could have refused. Surely he could have said, "No, I don't want to play for you. I want to play for South Africa."
Um, Once again, so there was an interesting one. It all comes down to contracting. And look, I think you've got to be sympathetic. I don't know whether you're talking in theory or in reality. I mean,
No,
if you're,
no, I'm
are you
talking.
saying,
I'm talking
are
in
you saying
reality.
that?
I'm talking in reality. I mean, 2 days ago, Tony de Zorzi is a test player at Centurion. He goes home, puts his feet up for a couple of days because the match finished early, and what? He suddenly gets a phone call saying, "Oh, by the way, you've been signed and you have to go." That can't be right. Surely he could have said, "Well, I've got a choice, and I don't want to go because I know I'm not going to play, and I want to play for South Africa."
Yeah. Can you imagine what Tony De Zorzi's agent would say? Like, Tony, if you have any chance, if you want to have any chance of reaching Never Neverland and playing in the IPL, then saying no to the mini IPL, giving them the middle finger and saying, no, I'd rather play Test cricket, probably isn't the way to go. I know what you're saying. But anyway, I just want to say, I had the example of Temba Bavuma, and I spoke to somebody who's very close to him. And I said, as the Test captain, this was 6 weeks ago, I said, as Test captain, and a very much a fringe player at the Sunrisers Eastern Cape, could he not say to the Sunrisers, listen, I'd really appreciate a leave of absence, and you know, in fact, I want a leave of absence, so that because I want to take the team. I'm the captain, I'm the Test captain, and I want to take the team to New Zealand. It was pointed out to me that if that happened, then Cricket South Africa would have instructed Shukri Conrad not to select him. If the Eastern Cape Sunrisers wanted him, then Conrad would have been selected, because Cricket South Africa signed the contract with the 6 franchises.
Right.
So if Conrad selected Bavuma because Bavuma was unavailable, then Cricket South Africa would be in breach of contract with Sunrisers Eastern Cape. So therefore, they wouldn't have selected him, even if he was available.
Wow. It's kind of amazing, Neil. Obviously, an emotionally charged issue. I mean, I'm emotionally charged on the other end that, you know, we're going to have a bunch of players that turn up in South Africa that most people would never have heard of. I mean, some of them will, of course, like Dwan Olivier and Keegan Peterson and a few others. But, you know, from a New Zealand fan's perspective, I mean, it's just disgraceful that our prime series is going to be against a team that no one even knows who they are. But I just wanted to mention one other thing, Neil, and I don't know this for sure, but Dean Elgar is retiring, as we know, and that's about a week or so away now, after the second test in Newlands. But I saw an interview with him with Pommy and Mbangwa on Supersport the other day, and I just listened to what he said, and the summary that I took out of it was, he says, look, I don't give a shit about my stats. I just want my team to win. That's my summary, obviously. And his stats are very good. And, you know, what a magnificent 185 in the first test match against India and Centurion. But, you know, I've been very critical of David Warner retiring mid-season. And, you know, cheekily, it's like, well, he just wants to avoid New Zealand at the end of the season because he never gets any runs there. But I think in Dean Elgar's case, there must be something a bit stronger going on. And my reading, you know, my sort of interpretation of it is that he's probably said, well, I'm retiring. I'm not going to New Zealand with a C team. I want to win, not play in a C team.
Well, I understand completely why you would read it that way, but Dean Elgar would have loved to go to New Zealand. He would have. I mean, he's got nothing else on. I mean, there's you know, he could have taken a month off and gone into the bush and put his feet up and whatever and relaxed. But he would have loved to have gone to New Zealand. But Shukri Conrad he's a tough, uncompromising man, and not unafraid to make tough decisions, as indeed Elgar was when he was captain. So Shukri has had a conversation with Dean Elgar and said, mate, you're 36. You haven't scored 100 for 2 years. It's been 35 innings since your last 100. And I think you might want to stand down after the India series because I'm not going to select you again.
Oh,
and
okay.
So Elgar said, well, there's the World Test Championship to think about. You know, you're going with a severely weakened team to New Zealand. I'm available. Do you not think that I might be a handy person to have along, seeing as I've got 85 test caps, and there's like you're not going to have that many between the whole of the rest of the squad, and in fact, he doesn't have half that many. And Conrad has said, no, I've made my decision.
Oh, okay.
So Dean Elgar had no choice but to step down. And I think that I mean, my latest Manners on Cricket column, I've written about the fact that Shukri Conrad's never changed his mind about anything in his whole life, and he's not about to start now. But I did suggest that if he could swallow his pride and change habits of a lifetime, then a phone call to Dean Elgar might not be a bad idea to say, Dino, I didn't realize you had it in you. You're obviously still got it, and I've changed my mind. Could you come along with us to New Zealand? It may well be that Elgar has said, no, mate, you made your bed, you lie in it now.
Yeah.
But look, the playing for his country has meant everything to Dean Elgar, and probably too much at times. He's been a bit sort of white-knuckled in his ferocious determination. But he didn't want to retire. But by the way, it's interesting that Essex, I understand, I don't know whether you've heard this, Andy, but Essex have decided to trade in their 38-year-old gritty, nuggety, left-handed opening batsman for a like-for-like replacement, because I understand that Dean Elgar is about to sign a contract with Essex to finish his career down there as a replacement for Sir Alistair Cook.
For Alistair Cook. Well, Kumar Sangakkara, wow, I watched him, Manners, at Lord's one day. I don't know, it was a few years ago now, but when he was playing for Surrey, and I watched him score it was 2 days. I think he scored 190 on consecutive days, so it's not the worst place to finish up. Well, then again, I'm not sure I want to go to Essex, but that's another matter. Hey, Neil, no, thanks for bringing perspective on that, because I guess Dean Elgar basically has got he's got the same treatment as Ross Taylor got. They said, Ross, you're not going to get picked for the South Africa tour, which I think you were there for that. You've got to retire at the end of the Bangladesh series. And I saw Ross not so long ago, actually, in Jakarta. I live in Indonesia, as you know, and yeah, he's still well pissed off about how his career ended, but that's another matter. Hey, Neil, the last thing I wanted to talk to you about is why is I'm on radio, you're on radio. I've been trying to get into cricket commentary over the last couple of years. We'll get back into it after a 10-year or so career in financial services in London with the South African bank, actually, Investec. But I've found it really hard to find commentary opportunities. And I remember speaking to you a while ago, and I said, well, where are you getting your commentary opportunities from? And you said, well, it sure as hell wasn't from home. So why has cricket commentary on the radio or in an audio format died in South Africa?
It's desperately, desperately sad. It's hard to explain. But there's the public broadcaster, the SABC, has a mandate. And so, look, cricket's never been especially profitable on the radio, but it has been enormously influential. And as we started the program, me talking about cricket for the greater good, we might as well finish it on a similar subject. But, the SABC was on radio anyway, was reasonably efficient, streamlined. There was advertising. It paid for itself. It made a lot of people very happy. And, there was a time in like the 90s, I suppose, when there was a perception that radio commentary, cricket commentary on the radio was a largely white indulgence. It was listened to by privileged white people as they drove along the coast to their holiday home at Christmas time. But it actually transpires, and I know from personal experience, the number of black people that have come to me and said, I grew up in the rural Eastern Cape, and we only had radio. That was our only access to the game. I learnt the game through your commentary,
Wow.
and there is an awareness now that is the case. But there is also an awareness amongst the SABC that it's too hard. It's so much easier to go back to the DJ playing records and the commercial advertising model revenue, and it's just there's just a lack of will to make it happen. Very, very sad.
Do you have like pop-ups happening like in New Zealand, for example? We've got the Alternative Commentary Collective, which has been running for about 8 years now. They're now a partner of New Zealand Cricket to broadcast cricket. I mean, they just do it off the telly. Well, actually, they've been at the game in Mount Wanganui today, but they just do it off the telly and they just have a bit of fun with it. I mean, is there any kind of startup that's trying to get into this broadcasting space?
Is there a commercial aspect to that? It's a bit like guerrilla cricket, right?
Yeah.
I mean, do they sell advertising? Are they doing it for fun? Are they sort of students sitting on a sofa somewhere, or are they?
It's actually a spin-off of another main channel called Radio Hauraki, and so the guy behind it is a guy called Mike Lane, who's got some pretty high position at Radio Hauraki, and he just started it with a bunch of mates, but now it's going like it's mainstream. They've got a contract.
So
with
they
New
have
Zealand
advertising
Cricket.
revenue. They have advertising revenue.
Yeah, they've got a bunch of sponsors and advertising, and there's always giveaways and KFC and various other Liquorland, and I don't know. They've got loads of people involved. I don't know exactly how it works, but my point is that they've started from nothing, and in just got like it was a couple of students on a sofa. And they had that famous bit of commentary when Grant Elliott hit Dale Steyn for 6 to get New Zealand into the final of the 2015 World Cup. So it's about from that time, but now they have an actual contract with New Zealand Cricket. They're a broadcast partner. So I just wonder whether there's any movement like that in South Africa, because it seems like a very good opportunity, particularly when you hear that story about those people growing up in the Eastern Cape.
Yeah, and just another question: is that an online service or is that actual radio?
No, so they don't. They're not on frequencies.
Right.
But they run off a thing called iHeartRadio. They do it through Facebook and the website and everything. So
Okay.
they're basically doing exactly what SENZ is doing at the moment for New Zealand Cricket. So actually, there is nothing on the frequencies in New Zealand right now. They say that SENZ says there is, but there actually isn't. We know there isn't. But anyway, I don't want to debate that. But
no, you've answered. You've answered your own question, Andy. You've answered your own question. I don't know how much time you spent in South Africa. I know you were an infrequent visitor to Johannesburg, but you will know from your time in Africa that that the children growing up in the Eastern Cape have no access to the internet and airtime. I mean, you know how much airtime costs. I mean, the same people now who come to me and say, "Oh, someone told me that there's a commentary service online," and there was a time when the SABC actually put ball-by-ball commentary online as well. And for somebody, look, the majority of this country buy airtime for their cell phones in 5 rand units, even 2 rand units. You have to do what is that? What is that, like 10 US cents? No, 5 cents, closer to 5 cents. That's times are tough. I mean, the idea of buying enough airtime to listen to a day's ball-by-ball commentary on the internet is
well, no, but Neil, you're dead right, and I think I'm just kind of trying to imagine a village somewhere in the Eastern Cape, or it might be in another part of the country. It could be in where I came through from Namibia, down through Springbok and places like that. And I think of like people like my friend Jeff's mum. She's an avid cricket fan, but she listens to it on the radio. That is the way she listens to it. Do you think she's suddenly gonna go out and buy some data pack to listen to some streaming service on an app that doesn't work? No. And I think this is where, I mean, again, if we just, or maybe just wind this up, I mean, I've got a massive gripe with New Zealand cricket for allowing the radio partner to just disintegrate, basically. But you talked about SABC just not doing it. Well, why does Cricket South Africa not care about it? Why don't they have a partner? If SABC doesn't want to do it, well, Manners and McLean could do it. I mean, anyway, I think we've talked the subject of South Africa cricket to death. But Neil, look, really, really, really grateful for you to come on the show today, particularly on the last day of the year. Hopefully you've got your bike tyre puncture repaired. And I hope 2024 is going to be a good one for you. And I guess there's a very outside possibility we might meet up in Wellington to watch New Zealand play South Africa.
Well, in fact, it would have to be Mount Maunganui or Hamilton, because I don't think they're playing in Wellington.
Yeah, well,
but you know what? I'd much rather go for Mount Maunganui.
Yeah, I mean, my grandmother lives in Hamilton, on the edge of Hamilton, and that's as far as I get into Hamilton. So, Scott Styris moved out. Ross Taylor lives there, though. But yeah, no, Mount Maunganui would be a lovely spot in February, Neil. So you never know. But thanks a lot, Neil. And so from myself and Neil here on the Great Cricket Debate on Global Cricket Radio, we're signing off, I should